I bet when you got out of bed this morning, school students, you weren't expecting to attend a class called Eschatology 101, but that's what we're doing together tonight. Eschatos is a Greek word. It simply means the end times. This is the knowledge, which is the logy part of the end, the knowledge of the end. That's what we're talking about tonight. What does the Bible say about what we can expect to happen toward the end of this age? And if you've been travelling with us over recent weeks, you'll know the question we keep coming back to is when the disciples have said to Jesus, when's all this going to happen and what are going to be the signs of the end of the age? So Jesus is giving them some knowledge about what is going to be going on at the end of the age. So we're talking about, because we're dealing with Jesus' answer, he's on the Mount of Olives, he's just come out of the city of Jerusalem, and he's talking about the events between right there in that moment, which we know of as the first coming of Jesus, and the second coming of Jesus, which is still in our future, and that includes what's still in their future, but it's in our past, the destruction of the temple in AD 70. So like there's three separate hills there, there's three separate events that are in mind as we think about whatever is going on when we read prophecy in the Bible. What was going on at the time? So if we're looking at Matthew 24, what was going on at the first coming of Jesus? If we're looking at the book of Daniel, what was going on in Daniel's life and in the empires that were around at that time? So it starts off there, but then you go right to the end. Okay, so what's that telling us about the second coming of Jesus, or the end of this age? They're both the same event. And are there things in between those that it's also giving us some clues about? And that's what we've spent the last couple of weeks looking at. All that history stuff. Yeah, there's some amazing things that happen between the moment Jesus spoke those words and the moment that he returns again. And it's worth knowing about those things, but it's also worth knowing what hasn't yet happened. And that's what we're going to be focusing our attention on together tonight. Now, to really get into the headspace of being able to talk about the end, there's a few terms that it's good for us to know about. So we're going to run through a few definitions as we get started tonight. And the first of these is the rapture. Who's heard of the rapture? Who's ever panicked that they might have missed it? I was talking to somebody this morning because I was looking for Carol and I was like, can't find her anywhere. The rapture must have happened. So for people who, like me, grew up when there were movies coming out where those sorts of scenes got depicted in the movies, that was kind of this stress. I remember getting home from school or from being out and not being able to find mum or dad or anyone in the family. The house is empty and it's like, oh no, have I missed it? Because there was this genuine fear that, hey, if Jesus kind of snatches people away and the people who are left are the ones who missed out on that. That was actually a big deal. So this is what the rapture is. It means literally to be caught up. And one of the classic passages that talks about it is in 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 13. And this is a fair while after Jesus has spoken in the Olivet Discourse, and there are some people who are thinking, gee, it's been taking a while, or did we actually miss it? So this is what Paul says to them. We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, concerning those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve like the rest who have no hope. Now, he's not literally talking about what we would call asleep. Who's he talking about? People have died, okay? But he's talking about it from a point of view which realises, hey, that's not the end. That is literally like being asleep. You will wake up at some point. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, in the same way, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. For we say this to you by a word from the Lord. We who are still alive at the Lord's coming will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself, and this is where the rapture is being described, will descend from heaven with a shout, with the archangel's voice and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are still alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. So whether we're thinking about those who have passed away, and we were thinking, oh, I thought Jesus was going to come back really soon, and it would be before many people have passed away, like these guys have been thinking, or whether it's that sense of, oh, did I miss it? No, you won't miss it. When Jesus returns and catches up all those who belong to him, and we meet him in the air, it's going to be a very public event. He will descend from heaven with a shout, with the archangel's voice and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise. So that's the rapture that the Bible speaks about that we look forward to. Let's blaze on. Tribulation. That's something we've been talking about over recent weeks. By the way, these definitions are all on your page, so you don't have to kind of scribble down too much. But if you want to make some extra notes, feel free. And feel free to write down some questions, because once we've defined our terms, we're going to have some questions about them as well. So tribulation is literally a time of suffering. And this is a passage that describes that. After this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people and language, which no one could number, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And they were clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb." All the angels stood around the throne, and along with the elders and the 4 living creatures, they fell face down before the throne and worshipped God, saying, "Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honour and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Does anyone know what that's describing? I don't know if you've skipped ahead to see what the next slide is and see where the passage is coming from. It's describing a scene in heaven. And the Apostle John is being given a vision of what's going on in heaven. And this is recorded in the book of Revelation. And the passage continues on. Then one of the elders asked me, "Who are these people in white robes and where did they come from?" And John, who's probably thinking, now how am I going to answer this one, because he doesn't know, in good rabbinical tradition, he answers a question with a question and says, "Sir, you know." Then he told me, "These are the ones coming out of the Great Tribulation. They washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And for this reason they are before the throne of God, and they will serve him day and night in his temple. The one seated on the throne will shelter them. They will no longer hunger. They will no longer thirst. The sun will no longer strike them, nor will any scorching heat. For the Lamb who is at the centre of the throne will shepherd them. He will guide them to the springs of the waters of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eye." If you've been here over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about Jesus' description of a period of tribulation, which now John is getting a view from heaven on. And I don't know if you remember, but in Matthew 24 it said, unless God had cut short these days, no one would have survived. There's going to be a really terrible time that these people will have gone through, but the assurance is that God will rescue them, that he will redeem them, and that they will be comforted in his presence. So there is a time of suffering that is yet to come in the future that we need to know about and be prepared for. And we'll look more about that in just a moment. Millennium. Who's heard of the Millennium? If you're a Star Wars fan, we're not talking about the Millennium Falcon. Nothing to do with it. What was the thing? There was the Millennium... What was it in London they had? Was it Tower? Clock? Dome? There was something going on. So millennium literally means 1,000 years. And in the book of Revelation, it talks about Jesus reigning over all nations of the earth for 1,000 years. And this is how it's described in Revelation 20. Then I saw thrones and people seated on them who were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and who had not accepted the mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So it's referring back to those hardships of the tribulation period. Now, what's all that about? Well, we'll get to that in the future. But what we need to know first is that it's talking about this reign of Christ for 1,000 years. That's what the millennium refers to. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So we're getting all this information downloaded, right? And we're going, man, how am I going to make sense of this? Well, we'll package that up in a minute. But for now, all you need to know is the millennium is Jesus reigning over all nations of the earth for 1,000 years. That's what the book of Revelation talks about. Okay, we're almost there. Antichrist. Who's heard of the Antichrist? There's different rock bands, rock songs, all named after the Antichrist. It's a common theme in apocalyptic movies. This is a person who represents the climax of human rebellion against God. And there's more than one Antichrist mentioned in the New Testament. The New Testament talks about Antichrist because really anyone who is kind of a symbol of rebellion against God, anyone who leads others in rebelling against God, anyone who distorts who Jesus really is and tries to lead them in a different direction, they are against Christ. So it's a very common term. But the Bible also gives that as not only a description of people, that they are antichrist, or they are antichrists in the way that they influence others, but it also indicates there's a particular person who will do that more powerfully and more influentially than anyone else ever has. And that person kind of has that label. In Thessalonians, he's actually referred to as a man of lawlessness as well. That's another term for this person. And this is what 2 Thessalonians 2 says. Now, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, we ask you, brothers and sisters, not to be easily upset or troubled, either by a prophecy or by a message or a letter supposedly from us, alleging that the day of the Lord has already come. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come, unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in God's temple proclaiming that he himself is God. So if we're here and we talked about Antiochus for Epiphanes, he was this kind of person. The Romans, and we talked about a guy by the name of Gessus Florus, he was this kind of person. But in the future there is yet another one to come, somebody who will symbolise that even more powerfully. And that is something that is still awaiting the future. And Paul says, don't worry guys, when this person arrives, you'll realise, hey, this is what the Bible's actually been saying that we can expect. And Christ will come at that time. And that's where we get to the second coming, when Christ returns to judge the world. Now concerning that day now, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. So remember we talked about the rapture, when Jesus is going to come down with a shout of the archangel and a loud trumpet call and catch up his church. It also describes Jesus coming to judge the world. Now, should we understand those as happening at the same time or at different times? Well, we'll get on to how it all fits together later. But those are described by different terms. The rapture, Jesus catching up the church. The second coming is when Jesus actually comes down onto the earth, and that's the beginning of the millennium, if that's your understanding of how that all works. That's the beginning of him bringing all things to an end, the second coming of Christ. So we've rattled through, and this is why I've given you handouts, because that was a lot of definitions, right? And a lot of information. It's like, what are we even doing here? This is kind of brain clutter. But as we go through and say, okay, this is what Christians over the centuries have believed about the end, we need to be able to use those words and kind of get what they mean. So is there any clarifying that you want to do, or questions that you want to ask about what each of those words are about? The rapture, where do we go next? The Antichrist, the second coming, the Millennium, tribulation, any of those terms that you need more info on, or is that good enough, the info I've given you? Nah. Apostasy. Who wants to define apostasy? No etymology fans here. Basically, misleading teaching, false teaching. Teaching that sounds right, but it's actually dangerously wrong. What's that? That's an example of apostasy, yeah. So it sounds very spiritual, sounds, like, yep, that's okay. And like the old sayings go, the best lies are mostly truth. They're the most dangerous lies. And apostasy is often like that. Sounds, uses a lot of words that, are Bible words or whatever it might be, but they just take people enough off course that over time it leads them in really dangerous directions. So apostasy is a really serious thing. Alrighty, any other questions on that? That was a good question. I wondered about whether I should explain that at the time, so I'm glad you asked. Alrighty, so if we're going to kind of be people who are able to look forward to the future with a sense of, I think I know what Jesus was wanting me to know when he took all that time to talk about the end, and when he took the time to give the Apostle John that vision that described the end. There's a reason why God has spoken. About 1/10 roughly of the New Testament is talking about what's still in our future. So it's a pretty significant chunk, and we ought to get to know it pretty well. So as we now take those concepts, we're going to try to fit them together and say, well, what is it that we can expect about the future? And is it okay if we have different ideas about how it's all going to play out? So if you're cool for us to continue, we'll go ahead and we'll look at how those ideas start to fit together in a picture of what we can expect of the future. There are 4 basic biblical views of eschatology, knowledge of the end. Okay? And what I really want you to know, first of all, is that faithful Bible-believing Christians who are filled with the Holy Spirit hold all these different views. So it's okay not to have it all worked out. It's okay to feel passionately about it's going to look like this, while at the same time realising that other people believe passionately that it's going to look like that, and it's okay. People who are great friends, people who work together in ministry, people who are in the same church have all of these different views. So it's worth, that doesn't mean, just whatever you think is cool. No, it's actually worth figuring out why you hold your view, because our convictions matter. But at the same time being humble enough to recognise it's okay when other people are convinced of something else. And that's true of so many different topics. And God often allows us that ambiguity in some of what we believe, those secondary issues, because he's always more interested in how well we love each other than whether we are conditional about it. I'll love you if you're correct. I'll love you if you agree. I love you, only on the basis of, we're the same on all this stuff. That's not real life. And so the church has always disagreed on a whole bunch of issues. So eschatology is not one of those salvation critical issues. You won't miss out on being in God's eternal kingdom because you've got it wrong and how it was going to work. Faith in Jesus, that's what it comes down to. So all these views are held by Spirit-filled Bible-believing Christians, and all of these views have their strengths and weaknesses. And the better you know the other views, the more likely you are to spot the weaknesses in your own views and be on guard against that. That's one of the benefits of being in relationship with people who don't see things the same as you. There's this tool that we often use called Johari's window. Has anyone heard of that? And basically the idea is, well, I'm seeing it like this, but I really need somebody who's looking at it from a different perspective to show me the things that I can't see from where I'm standing. So knowing those different views helps us to benefit from them and alleviate some of the weaknesses that we might otherwise have. So we're going to hold our eschatology loosely while holding to the underlying biblical teaching tightly. Where Jesus is very clear about why he's explaining about the end, we want to hold on to that really tightly, not lose sight of that. And especially as we get into chapter 25, he's going to drive it home really, really strongly. This is why I want you to know this stuff. This is why I want you to care about it. So that requires wisdom and humility. But there's one exception. There's one view which you might have come across. It was a big deal earlier on in history, and it's always going to rear its ugly head. It's called creaturism, and whether you know it by that label or not doesn't matter, but it's basically the idea that everything that was prophesied in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, it's already happened. The destruction of Jerusalem, all these things happen. Now that's all being fulfilled, and the Bible's kind of finished in terms of what it's said to expect in the future. There's a whole bunch of people who believe that. It doesn't actually line up with what the Bible clearly says we can expect about the end of the age and what Jesus has clearly said about what he's going to do. So if you ever kind of hear that perspective, as much as we're saying, hey, all these views are valid, that one that says, hey, all Bible prophecy is finished, it's all fulfilled, or it was all meant for the first century, and look at these historical things, look at that, it's all done and dusted. Yes, some things have already happened. We kind of need to acknowledge that. That's actually faith building when you see that. But don't get sucked into thinking that it's all been done. Jesus still has a lot to do in the world. And if you think that he's not, you're going to be really dangerously misled. So don't fall for that kind of stuff. There you go. I think that's just what I said. So all the views that we'll consider acknowledge that, yes, a lot of things have already been done, but not everything has been done. And so we're going to figure out what that might look like. So let's talk about those 4 biblical views of eschatology. Here's the first one, amillennialism. I'm going to have to do some tongue aerobics tonight to be able to get my mouth around these words. Who's heard of amillennialism before? Okay, this is a really popular view. Essentially, There are some key passages, and they should be on your handout, so they're worth looking up later. You may have heard of some of these people who have believed in amillennialism and what it's all about. Essentially, amillennialism is, as it shows on that diagram down the bottom, this idea that when Revelation, which is the only place that speaks of Jesus reigning for 1,000 years, 1,000 years was the biggest number they used commonly in that era. So it would be like us saying like forever and ever. It was just the biggest term that they could use. And essentially what the Apostle John was saying there, according to this view, was Jesus is going to reign on the earth for a very long time, up until the time of the end, and when he's going to rapture his church. He's going to come down and judge the nations, and that's when we'll have the new heaven and the new earth after that. It's a very simple view, and everything that the Bible prophesies, they either fit into what goes on during the age of the church, which is where we are right now. How's Jesus reigning on the earth now? Does it feel like Jesus is reigning? No. And, yes, where do you see Jesus reigning on the earth? It's in us. Yeah. It's in his church. So every time we submit to the good lordship of Christ, we're participating in this millennium, according to the amillennial view, which is Jesus is ruling me. I'm just not living my own way. Jesus is my Lord. He's king. So his rule and reign is here right now in me. Is it perfect? No, because sometimes I stuff up, and so do the rest of us. And not everyone has accepted the reign of Christ. But yet it is here in some shape now. And when he returns, when he catches us up as his church, when he judges the earth, when he brings in the new heavens and the new earth, when he does away with sin forever, then it's going to be perfect. Now it's not perfect. So that's basically what amillennialism is about. And as you can see, there are some pretty good theologians who have believed that that's what the Bible is talking about. We're not going to kind of argue the nitty-gritty tonight. So if you really want to get nitty-gritty, you'll have to come and see me later. But we're going to just simply kind of state these are what the views are. Here's another one, and this is very similar to amillennialism, but it's a little bit different. This is called postmillennialism. Post meaning something you can lean on, dead right. The other meaning is after. So essentially what postmillennialism is this idea, yes, Jesus is going to reign on the earth through his church, like we've just been talking about, but we think it's going to be a golden age where most people have realised that that's the best way to live. The gospel's gone out to all nations. Remember the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all nations, baptising them in the name of the Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to what? Obey everything I've commanded. So postmillennialism sees the church continuing to do what Jesus asked us to do, more and more people hearing about Jesus, more and more people being baptised into him, more and more people obeying him in their daily lives, so that the world basically gets better and better and better, because God's ways are always the best ways. So it sees this golden age happening before the end, when again Jesus returns, raptures his church, judges the earth, new heavens, new earth, heaven and hell. Make sense? Alrighty. At different times in history, this has been really popular because the church has been growing, people have been coming to faith. Like we've seen in revivals, for example, prisons being closed down because there's just not so much crime in the areas anymore. And people have been going, we're on the way, it's coming. And then we've had other eras where it feels like the church is in retreat and everything's getting worse and people are going, wow, what's going on? But that's what postmillennialism is all about. It will get better until we have this golden age, and then after that, the end will come. And there are those key passages. Notable representatives, Jonathan Edwards, who's heard of him? He was a Puritan, a prolific writer in America. B.B. Warfield is an American guy as well. Alrighty. Those views are quite similar in their idea of the millennium. It's a symbolic thing. John was writing at a time of great persecution, and so he couldn't just be very, very explicit because there was political pressure on Christians. They were being tortured for their faith, so he needed to use that symbolic language like we read in the book of Daniel and in other places, and not be too overt about how he described things. The next couple of views take a more literal reading of the words in Revelation and say, yep, we believe it's going to be 1,000 years. So this is those two views. Historic premillennialism. Same key passages as before, but rather than reading some of those things symbolically, like 1,000 years just means a long time. They read them more literally. 1,000 years is 1,000 years. That's what it says, that's what it means. Okay? Now, you might prefer one approach over the other, but the reality is we always read things symbolically. It's just agreeing on which things are symbolic and which things are literal. That's where people have differences of opinion. So you go through Daniel, for example, and you see these beasts coming out of the sea, and you see these humongous idols, and you see boulders being thrown out of mountains. And most people go, it's probably not literally going to be that beast. It's probably something that is represented by this fearsome-looking creature. We're always interpreting things in terms of the symbols that are in Scripture. These views take certain things as more literal than the previous two did. So, again, there's some well-known theologians, if you're into theology, who believe this historic view. This is one of the very early views that we have historical records from in history. Irenaeus was one of the early church fathers. And basically the idea is this. Like what you would get with a literal reading of Matthew 24, Jesus is speaking about, hey, watch out. Remember, hey, if you see these things happen, be ready to act. Watch out, there's going to be a 7-year period of tribulation before the end. Where do they get the figure of 7 from? They read back into Daniel. Remember when Matthew said, let the reader understand? They're looking back into Daniel's prophecy, just like Jesus said. They're reading about these periods of time that Daniel spoke about, and I think we're pretty sure that that means 7 years. 7 years of tribulation, then Jesus is going to catch up his church, and there's going to be 1,000 years period of reign on the earth. After that, where people have had this opportunity to live under the goodness of Christ's reign, everything's going the way that God wanted them to go on the earth, there's still that opportunity to have a final choice. Now, are you in or are you out? And Satan's going to lead this final rebellion against God. Jesus is going to squash it, and after that, new heavens, new earth. Pretty quickly described there, but that's what the historical premillennial view is. It got a bit of a revamp in the last century, and this is the one that you've probably seen most if you've come from a similar background to me. And that's called a dispensational premillennial view. So again, this is a literal interpretation, and it organises history into eras where God's doing different things at different times. So the era of Garden of Eden, then there's the fall. Okay, then we have an era after that. Then there's flood, and then we've got a new season after that. And we've got the Tower of Babel, and things change again. Then we've got Abraham and the nation of Israel. And so there's these eras where God's doing different things with his people and with the world generally. And right now we're in the era of the church. And what this view teaches, which is a little bit different to the historic view, is this. God's working through his church to make disciples of all nations, like we've just been talking about. The gospel's going to go right to the ends of the earth. People are going to have the opportunity to put faith in Jesus. Then Jesus is going to return, but not to the earth. The rapture will be Jesus comes down and catches up his church and says, right, we're out of here for a while. And the reason that he will do that is because he's not yet finished with the nation of Israel. Remember, Daniel was a Jew, and those prophecies were originally given to the Jews. So in this view, that 7-year period of tribulation isn't for the church. That's been taken away. It's actually for the people of Israel, where their journey with God will kind of be reset and will continue. And they will have an opportunity to see the one who they crucified and respond to him. So there's all these events that go on during the tribulation. And then after that, Jesus returns with his church, along with those who, through that period of tribulation, actually turn to Jesus from the nation of Israel, and together they will reign on the earth until there's that final judgment, heaven and hell. Wow, information overload there, right? How are you going with all that? Hopefully, you got a bunch of questions, because those are the basic views that people hold. Amillennial, postmillennial, historic premillennialism, or dispensational premillennialism. And whether you know those words does not matter one bit. But hopefully, as you can see the diagrams, as we stand back between the cross and the rapture and we look forward, we can see there's a rapture, there's a second coming, there's a final judgment. There's a millennium. Those things are going to happen. There's a tribulation. The order that they happen is different in each of those views. Exactly the details of what those things will look like are a little bit different. Is the millennium literally Jesus is on a throne in Jerusalem ruling all the nations of the earth? Or is it that he is present in all his people scattered all around the world and his reign is in the lives of those people? So there are different understandings of what those words mean, but all of those views involve looking forward and seeing each of those things happening in different ways. So this is your opportunity, basically, as a bit of a Q&A session. Say, okay, so what do we think, or what do I think, and what should we think, and what is this, who cares anyway? Anything that's on your mind to ask about or to comment on, this is kind of an open mic opportunity. So, what are you interested in when it comes to this kind of stuff? Nat, you had your hand.
I'm still a step behind all of that. Back at creaturism.
Creaturism, yeah.
So if that's what they think, that this stuff has already happened, well, where's Jesus? Where do they think he is?
Yeah, so that's why we don't consider it a biblical view. So creaturism basically would teach that Jesus is present in us as he is right now through the Holy Spirit, and that will just continue forever on this world, kind of the way it is. So in some ways a little bit like postmillennialism, in that things will get better and better, and it's just going to be this glorious future that everyone who's alive will benefit from the fact that God intervened in history, he set up the church, now it's just this global movement that blesses everybody. That's kind of where it goes. Yeah, and when you know how good heaven is, it's like, why would we settle for a future where, yes, you could believe, hey, once your time is finished on this earth, then you get to go to this other place somewhere. But it's kind of that easy thing of, well, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, you know. So it's a view for those people who maybe aren't that sure that the Bible's real after all. So it's a way of saying, you know, we kind of believe and it makes sense, but we don't have to believe anything too difficult in a sense. That might be being a little bit harsh, but yeah, that's why Christians reject it. It lacks a final hope. If sin goes on forever, that kind of sucks. I don't like God's plan if he's not going to finish sin. So, sorry.
I thought with the rapture it was supposed to take the Christians off earth before all the suffering was going to happen. But
Yeah.
the tribulation beforehand, do the Christians still suffer with that suffering?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because most of us in the West would believe probably the bottom view, which is the rapture happens before the tribulation, and that tribulation is something, sadly, for the Jews, that's going to be part of their journey. In the prophecy of Daniel and in other places that's spoken about. So that's the most common view, and if you've read the Left Behind books or watched Left Behind movies, you know, all that kind of stuff represents that idea. The church will be raptured away because there's a verse in the Bible that says, you know, for we have not been appointed to suffer wrath. And so people thought, well, the tribulation is all about suffering wrath. It's going to be terrible, so surely we're not going to be here for that. Historically, the early church didn't believe that. And I think a big reason why is because they were in the middle of it. They were already being killed for their faith. They were already losing family and friends and possessions because they believed in Jesus. So they knew that actually suffering for the Christian is fairly normal. So that view that Christians are snatched up and won't have to suffer the tribulation tends to be held most strongly in places in the world where there's little suffering for your faith. In places where people do suffer for their faith, they kind of are more comfortable with the fact that that's just the way it's going to be until Jesus comes back and makes it all right. So, daunting, because no one wants to be around for that. But yet again, when you read Matthew 24, the most natural reading is, Jesus is saying, be prepared for this because you're going to have to react when it happens. So that makes most sense of those earlier views, or particularly the historic premill view. But yes.
So where did you read my Bible?
I know, me too.
You said about those like people around the throne in the heaven.
Yes.
And now they are serving God day and night. I don't see that, or do we not see that as a position where Christians are? Would that be like people have gone through, they were raptured before, people have gone through the tribulation and become Christians through that period of time? Are they the ones who serve God forever and we are in a different relationship with them?
Yeah, so depending on which view you hold as to how you're going to interpret that, but yes, so for those particularly with the bottom view, those people are those who have come to faith during the 7-year tribulation, and they'll be part of that millennial reign with Jesus. So they've literally died in that time, so they've gone to be with God. In not their final resurrected form, because the Bible teaches when Christ returns, we'll receive new bodies. But yet we're present in some mysterious way with God in a spiritual sense. So they're with him, but yet, as Thessalonians spoke about, Christ will bring with him those who are already in heaven with him. And so at that time they'll return and they'll reign with him on the earth. So, and for those who have been killed for their faith, there's almost this special position of honour as part of his throne room, for want of a better word, for those who are actually in his presence and receiving the comfort because of what they've endured.
So all of these ones, they all presume that you die, go to heaven, if you don't fall asleep.
Yeah, great question. So this doesn't address the question of what happens to your soul when you die. There are lots of Christians who believe that you are literally asleep, so as if you're sleeping in your bed, you're sleeping in the grave, whatever that looks like for you, because we know that there are different fates for different people. But then, when Christ returns, your consciousness is activated, you're given your new body, and you reign with him. The other more, traditional view is that you go to be with him where he is, but not in your final form, if you like. So you are spiritually present with God in heaven, like the angels who don't have physical bodies in the way that we understand them. So you're present with God, but when he comes and makes all things new, whatever the exact order is at the end, when he returns to the earth, brings in the new heaven and earth, we'll have new bodies like Jesus' glorious body. They'll bear a resemblance because Jesus' disciples could recognise him, but yet they won't be in any way sinful, weak, mortal, perishable, all that kind of stuff. They'll have this ability to do things that our current bodies can't, because if you remember with Jesus, all of a sudden he was in a room, or he was on the road travelling with people. How did he do that? We'll probably figure out when we get our L plates for our new bodies. So so they'll be different to our ones, but familiar. We'll recognise people, for example. Example of that might be Moses and Elijah on the Mountain of Transfiguration. There was something recognisable about them. How? Because the disciples who saw them on the Mount of Transfiguration weren't alive when these guys were on the earth, but yet when they saw them, they just knew who they were. How does that all work? God's designs are pretty amazing, is all I'd say. Pat?
This would be a good one.
Oh, hope not.
Why does Jesus or God really need a millennium? Because, we're already here. We may not be here, but people will be here. When it comes to judge, why is he giving everybody or some people a second chance?
That's a really good question. So an amillennial would just say, "Amen, preach it, sister," because the work of the millennium is to show how good the reign of Christ is, which is what the church is meant to be doing. We're meant to be the aroma of Christ in the world, and we're meant to share and declare his love so potently that people saying, "Well, I hate the idea of submitting to God, but I also see that it's so beautiful and wonderful." And so there's that opportunity for the Holy Spirit to convict people and say, "Yeah, this is actually true, and this is what I want for myself." So amillennialism makes sense from that point of view. But where the premill views would kind of have their strength is in the nation of Israel particularly, having its own journey of being reconciled to God. And there are some specific scriptures that speak about, for example, in Romans, it talks about the church. So Israel's like this tree that God's been growing up. And for a while, it's kind of been cut off because they rejected the Messiah. And so there's no fruit coming off that tree. And God's grafted in the Gentiles, people like us. And the fruit of the kingdom is growing on this new thing called the church that God established. But the teaching of Scripture is, but it's not the end yet for those original branches. God's still doing something there. So, and where Paul says to Christians in Romans 9 to 11, "Hey guys, don't get ahead of yourselves as though it's all about us now. God still wants to do some cool things through the nation of Israel." So the millennium, again, is where, from a more kind of literal understanding, Jesus is coming in and he's reigning from Jerusalem, from the promised land. So all of those promises to Abraham, not only about blessing all nations through him, because that was fulfilled in Jesus, but all those later promises about what would be happening in the nation of Israel and how that geographic location would be a centre of blessing on the earth will be kind of fulfilled in that time. Amillennialists will say, no, there's no need for that, already been fulfilled. The new heaven, the new Jerusalem is the ultimate fulfilment of that. So again, different views. We could be here till the cows come home debating the merits of them. The cool thing is both views make sense, when you actually read the scriptures that way. Julie, up or good? Any more questions on that stuff?
Which is your favourite?
Oh no! Because I am stubborn and hate changing my mind on anything, the bottom line, that's what I grew up with and that's what I'm sticking with. But in all honesty, I really do appreciate all the different views. For example, like we were talking about earlier, amillennialism really reminds the church we've got a responsibility. If we say we're followers of Jesus, we have to make it really obvious he's our king. We're not just following the pattern of the world. We're doing things his way. He's in charge. That's a big calling, and that way of looking at the end really emphasises, hey, we are his kingdom on earth. We show his reign, and we show that it's good. So that's a real strength of that view. The bottom one, it can be a little bit like, oh, we don't care what happens to the world. We're going to get caught up. God's going to do his thing. We'll come back when everything's all fine. But it also has other strengths as well. So that's the one I grew up in. One of the strengths of that view is it really emphasised, the rapture could happen any time. Not to make people scared, oh, did it happen already? It's more to make people aware, hey, be ready for it when it comes. That's one of Jesus's strong messages. Whereas, for example, in the postmillennial view, you'd be looking around saying, oh, the golden age ain't here. Yeah, we've got plenty of time to wait. So it could make you a little bit complacent. So started out dispensational premillennialist. I still think understanding God's different work in different eras of history is really important. I'm probably moving a little bit more to the historic view these days, where I don't see as strong an argument for like the secret rapture idea, like what happened? No one knew except the Christians who aren't here anymore. I don't think that's going to be how it plays out. I think it's more likely, sadly, that Christians will go through some of those hardships before the rapture happens, unlike that later view. Again, I could be wrong. There's that side of me that says I really hope I am. But there's also that side of me that says, you know what, whenever Christians have gone through hardship and suffering, it's always been good for the church, good for our witness in the world, and strangely good for us. So, comfort is the enemy of the church in the West. And when we keep giving people comforting messages, maybe we're not doing them any favours. Yes?
The thing is with that view that you were just saying too, we're all gone equals. I think I grew up with the third one. But I never actually really heard of the whole rapture thing until I was lucky enough to not even spent my life in church. If we're all gone before there's tribulation, then how do we guide people who've gone through that?
Yeah. Now, if you're in the dispensational view, the book of Revelation talks about two witnesses who come down, and then maybe it's Moses and Elijah, those kind of figures, who do have a powerful witness to the nations during the period of tribulation. It's really actually quite involved, which is why today it's kind of big picture, because if we dove into all of the passages, it would be really quite overwhelming. In the dispensational view, it's very much centred around the nation of Israel being witnesses. The Bible talks about 144,000 people from the nation of Israel who go out as witnesses into the world. And again, an amillennialist will say, why do we need that stuff? God's already given the job to the church. That's a symbolic reference. And all that kind of thing. Merit both ways. Either way, either view you take, God's got a plan to make sure everyone on earth gets to hear the truth before the end. That's a really important thing to remember. Tori. What do you think would be the pros and cons of that? Oh, I just learned from Jesus. I answered a question with a question. That's awesome. It's interesting, isn't it? What's a good thing about the idea that, even if you missed it, there's still time? So this. Are you stretching? Badly timed stretch. Can you think of any? Peter writes about, he's holding off the day of judgment, which is that final judgment, to allow time for more to be saved. So God's interested in as many as possible being saved. Absolutely. So there's that positive aspect. What would be a negative of this idea of, well, if you missed the first one, don't worry, because even though you might have to go through some hard times, there's still a chance. What's the downside of that?
Does it say during that time for us to arrange a lot of wine? So it won't be. So
It's going to be a terrible time.
It won't be like that one. Like keeps raining in our lives right now.
Yeah.
And it's a time of grace, but it's not going to be a great time. So you want to get saved as quick as you can.
Absolutely. So Jesus' rule will be different. Like it's not going to be the optional, even for us in the church. You know, our free will is very active, and sadly so in many cases. But it is an era of grace. Jesus will rule with a bottom line. It's my way or is the highway. There's no other way. And yes, that's good. But when you fight against authority and fight against goodness, it's going to be really painful. And that's all of us. So yeah, it's going to be a different kind of rule, definitely. Some scholars would say that the work of the Holy Spirit, which is happening now, to convict us of sin and make us want to choose Christ, the Holy Spirit will actually be taken away at that time, and so that desire, that inner desire to submit to God's rule and to be part of His kingdom just won't be in people. So while yes, you could respond, you're probably going to be very unlikely to. One of the big dangers from that point of view for me is whenever you say to people, but don't worry, there's always another chance, human nature is, oh, that's okay, even if it's going to be miserable. If it's true, then I'll know at the time and I'll make my decision then. Just not a great idea. The time, as Peter actually said earlier on in his preaching, the time for response is now. Now is all we have. Respond to Jesus now. You never want to rely on another future opportunity because no one knows when the day or the hour is. And whenever the Bible speaks about that, it never says, no one knows when the day or hour will be, but don't worry, if you miss it, it just says you don't know when it's going to happen. Be ready.
And that seems to be the attitude most people I've ever talked to about this is no one knows when will be the one in my life. I've never met somebody who have a conversation with somebody who's not yet a believer. I've never met a sense of urgency from somebody that
Yeah.
in my lifetime there's this sense that it's going to be generations.
Absolutely. And that's what Paul said to the Thessalonians. He says, while people are saying peace and safety, it's like, you know, we've got everything under control. Destruction will come on them suddenly, which is heartbreaking.
Does the Bible say what describes the tribulation? Because it could be a kind of something we've not even seen before. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't have COVID 3 years ago.
Exactly.
And like, there are
We've just got no idea.
There's been different types of warfare. There's been different types of chemical warfare. You know, like does it say anything about what?
It does.
tribulation will be like?
So you read through Revelation, and up until chapters 18, 19, the section between when the churches are being addressed, then you see a scene in heaven, and then kind of from chapters 9, 10 up to 18, 19, there's all of these judgments being rolled out. Again, how do you interpret all the symbolism there? Heaps of disagreement on that. But what they're really emphasising is there's these waves of different kinds of difficulties that people face, plagues and famines and earthquakes and wars, and like exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 24, these are the things you're going to see. But what they'll look like in that last round is just going to be so much more cataclysmic. And we don't know exactly the details of what that will be. Supervirus, nuclear war. It's just speculation. It is a scary thought because when Jesus says, "Unlike anything the world has ever seen," gee, the world's seen some shocking horrors, haven't it? So yeah, it's not fun to think about. Wayne.
Well, I was confused back years ago when I made my commitment. I'm still confused today. And I was told in the early stage, when I first became a Christian, people said, "What do you believe in?" Before I was asked, and I said, "What are you talking about?" And a lot of pressure put on me. That, go to read Revelation and learn all about it. And I was told to keep eyes on Christ. Keep your eyes on Jesus, He will lead and guide and back you through your life. He'll help you through it. If you don't understand, the Holy Spirit will make it clear to you.
And we'll come back around to that at the end, because that's I think, not as a isolated experience. Got a lot of friends.
Well, that's what I feel for them, Jimmy, that way affects me, and,
Yeah.
I don't want people to walk away from, still get too high and just walk away and lose their faith. They're just in front of people.
Absolutely.
In front of people.
And that's where we'll cycle back around to as to what we do to take away from this. First of all, any more questions on this kind of stuff? We've covered a reasonable amount of territory on it. Alrighty, so generally what happens in churches, which is what we've not done today, is you generally, as a church, and we've got churches around us who are very, very strong in particular views, particularly the bottom one and the top one. We've got churches who kind of teach either of those views very strongly, and they're the most common views that people would hold today, in my experience. And so what you do is then you teach through the Bible in the way that that view would kind of see things. And that's so much easier than what we've just tried to do, because this verse means this verse means that, and people just take it on board, yeah, cool, we've got it sorted out. The problem then is that we forget that we're part of God's bigger church, and we need to be able to understand that there are people who see things in different ways, and that's actually okay. And to have a broad sense of, okay, this is kind of what they're on about, these are some strengths and weaknesses, without feeling like we need to know all of the verses that kind of speak into each of those views and how we deal with them, I think is actually quite important. So it's good just for an awareness point of view. But here's a few things that I would really emphasise. I'm pretty sure that's the last slide. Yeah. About how we take away the info that we've gained tonight. One, I think this is a great thing to be interested in. So if this kind of makes you go, man, I just left there confused, I want to sort this out, I want to figure it out, then that's fantastic, because there are so many great resources online, there's so many great books, I can recommend some to you, and you will find, just because you're in the Bible study, it actually does a lot of good to you about peace and assurance, and God wins in the end, and this is the job of the church right now, and all those important ideas that come out of studying these, you'll get encouraged, and it doesn't matter which of those, the book or the author or the church is, that you will get blessed by studying the scriptures and seeing how they work in each of those systems. Again, recognising it's not the only way, and holding it loosely, but benefiting from whichever type of study you do. And I would encourage you, read authors who believe in all of those. For me, again, the top one, most of the good scholars around at the moment are either in the top one or the bottom two. Postmillennialism was kind of something that came out of America when they thought they were winning the world over and everything was going in the right direction. So that's probably not as strong as the others, but it still has some benefits. I'd say the other ones would benefit you enormously. So yeah, dive in. And when we, in a couple of weeks, we'll finish chapter 24 and we'll get into chapter 25, that's when that stuff will become really important. Okay, Jesus has just said this stuff. His disciples are going, what on earth? And they're thinking, how's this all going to look? And they're more confused than we are, all right? Because we've got the benefit of the rest of scriptures to read and all that kind of stuff. So they're all over the place. And then we'll watch Jesus tell some stories that make it really clear, okay, this is why that matters. This is what I need to remember. This is what I need to do. So don't worry, we're only just over a third of our way through what Jesus had to say on this. The rest is all application. It's okay to be a little bit confused. What we don't want to be confused about is what Jesus now goes on to say. Okay, this is what you need to do before the end comes. So that's what we get into.